lay out the relationship between insulin resistance and obesity.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So insulin resistance is the most common problem. It's the most relevant for chronic disease. Naturally, we want to know, all right, well, where did the villain come from?
Yeah.
What is the Breaking Bad story? I typically describe and teach that there are two paths. There's fast insulin resistance, which has its own noxious stimuli, that it comes quickly and it can go quickly. But then there is slow insulin resistance, and this touches on your question, so I'll answer it with that one in mind. One of the ways in which insulin resistance develops is by fat cells that get too big. Now, to really confirm, as much as we have an obsession on fat, on body fat, we actually look at it kind of incorrectly. We would say, okay, Jordan has 20 pounds of fat, whereas Ben has 30 pounds of fat, so Ben's naturally going to be sicker than Jordan. And yet, it's not the mass that matters most. It's actually the size of each individual fat cell. This is why, in that cardiometabolic crisis, the list of what's killing us, men die more from all of those except Alzheimer's disease. So if you look at the top 10, 9 of them go to men, and it's not even close. Men die more from these problems than women by orders of magnitude almost. But women are fatter than men. And so it's clearly not an issue of fat mass.
Per se. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you look at it as a percent body fat, a woman's going to be fatter than a man by design. That's supposed to be that way for reasons that we won't get into. But men have less body fat, but we have bigger fat cells. So I promise I'm answering the question. Yeah. But as a fat cell gets bigger and bigger, it's almost like a naughty little child who's taken the water balloon to the tap. Now they're filling it. Oh boy, you better take that balloon off or it's going to pop. Now the fat cell, acting in its own best interests, it has to adapt 2 ways to ensure that it doesn't pop. It doesn't want to die. In the body, we don't want our fat cells. We don't want any cell to die. That's a very messy, very inflamed process. So one thing, the fat cell, as it gets ever bigger, it can't turn off the fuel coming in. But what it can do is change the fuel coming out. So insulin has an absolute chokehold on fat cells. This is a little outside the question, so I won't quite get around to it yet. But insulin is an absolutely essential signal. As much as we focus on calories, insulin tells a fat cell to grow. And now the fat cell is growing and it's telling insulin, I am about to pop. And so I have to stop listening to you. And so I'm going to become deaf, or I'm going to become resistant to what you're telling me to do. And whereas earlier insulin was telling it to hold on to all of this fat, now the fat cell starts leaking out fat, even though insulin was originally telling it not to. This creates a problem that we can refer to as ectopic fat deposition, because now the fat cell is leaking out these things called free fatty acids. So blood fat levels are going up. Now, that's not normally a problem necessarily, but that should only happen when insulin is low. Now we have this weird state where insulin is high, which should be telling the fat breakdown to slow down. I'm getting into deep biochemistry actually really quickly. No. So normally if insulin is up because we've eaten some carbs and stuff, then fat in the blood would be down because insulin would be telling the fats to hold on to it. But now, or when we're fasting or low carbohydrate diet, then insulin is down and now we're mobilizing more fat. So normally the biochemistry in the endocrinology is such that if insulin's high, fats are down. If insulin's low, fats are up. Unless the fat cells are overfilled or have undergone hypertrophy or a growth expansion, now you have high insulin and high fats. And so the body can't burn that fat, it has to store it. And so now we start storing fat in tissues that are ill-suited, like the pancreas is getting fat.
Why isn't it just excreted?
Wow, that's a great question. So actually, if you'll allow me, I love that you just asked the question why. I tell my students that when you ask a scientist a why question, especially a cell biologist, my answer is God only knows. So I don't know why God designed the system to work that way. Why not excrete the fat? But
maybe it's because historically the probability of prolonged nutrient availability at that level was like 0.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right. I mean,
we're living in a very unique day.
Yeah. So the rule would have been historically, if you have extra food,
hold on to it.
hold on to it
Oh, yeah,
because
yeah.
hard times are coming.
So that is in fact reflective, though, of insulin's effect. It is so determined to store energy that it will literally depress metabolic rate. It will prevent any wasting of energy. So that's the first problem with touching on the question of what's the connection between obesity and insulin resistance, because there is a connection. So the fat cells get big. They get so big that they have to tell insulin, I'm done. I can't get any bigger, so I'm going to leak out the fats even though you don't want me to. But then there's a second feature that just compounds the problem, which is as the cells are getting bigger and bigger, and fat cells can grow unlike any cell in the body. No cell in the body is capable of the expansion that a fat cell is capable of, much to our chagrin. But as the fat cell's getting bigger and bigger, they're pushing each other further and further away from capillaries, from the smallest base unit of the blood vessel and all of its life-giving oxygen. And as it's getting pushed further and further away, the poor chubby fat cell is becoming hypoxic, or it's suffocating. And in an effort to ensure its survival, it starts slowly dripping out these pro-inflammatory proteins called cytokines, basically just hormones that turn on inflammation. And there's a whole bunch of them, dozens of them. But some of them will correct the problem. It's like a trail of breadcrumbs, and rather than Hansel and Gretel coming, it's getting to the capillary and stimulating the growth of a new blood vessel. And so it's kind of the fat cell's way of crying out, hey, I'm lacking oxygen, come feed me. And so we have that happen. So both of these things, we pity the poor fat cell. It's become so filled because of our lifestyle, which is a whole other topic worth diving into, but it becomes insulin resistant to ensure its own survival, spreading fat to be stored throughout the body, and then it becomes pro-inflammatory to try to correct its blood supply. And that then, the inflammation is one of the fast causes of insulin resistance that I alluded to a moment ago, that any time inflammation is turned on the body, yes, that is an immune process, but the overlapping of the immune and the metabolic is profound. Just a moment ago, you and I were speculating on why the system may be designed the way it is. One thing we know for certain is that of all the systems in the body, the immune and the metabolic are not only essential to survive times of deprivation and to defend the host, but they work hand in hand. After all, what good is it trying to mount an immune response if the warriors don't have any energy to work with? So anytime inflammation is up and it's staying up, that's going to cause insulin resistance. And indeed, it is one of the main causes of insulin resistance.
Okay.